Hi, Reed. Thank you so much for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I am just I'm a soft science major, going into secondary education. So like history, poli sci, psychology, sociology, and like just that kind of stuff, just cause. But space is super entertaining. I wanted to get my foot in the door on an opportunity to just talk and discuss, I guess.
Well, excellent. I have a lot of things I wanted to run by you with that background.
Perfect. Yeah, very nice. Okay.
I've been interviewing a lot of people. Originally, I was planning to just interview non-space people, like at the Starbucks and at the mall and what have you,
Okay.
random people.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do that between December and March. But after COVID started, I've had to kind of prearrange things, and so that's kind of changed
Okay.
the nature of the interviews a little bit. But
Fair.
I could tell you that most of the non-space people that I've interviewed don't know we're going to the moon in 2024. And I know that NASA's trying a lot to get that out there. I was wondering why you thought maybe it hasn't penetrated, the general public yet.
Um, this is potentially just like bias on my side, I guess, but I feel like the argument for space exploration has drastically like diminished, I guess, in terms of like a historical platform where it was like, oh hey, like let's show the Soviets they're all idiots and let's outdo them. And then following that, it was like, okay, like let's see if we can like actually solidify a purpose out there. And then like the last decade or so, like I think it's super worth it and super intriguing. But like if if per se like a elected official was to come out and say like my platform's sole focus or something like that is like not only like space exploration but like moon inhabitation or something like that, I don't think it would resonate very well. So in all seriousness, it kind of feels like it's almost avoided as a topic just because of the inherent like like it doesn't have any inherent like return on investment in terms of like an immediate gratification, and that's usually all the general public cares about. So it's almost kind of difficult for like people to make the argument like, hey, we need to be doing this. And as such, I feel like it's just something not a lot of people talk about because it's like you're either interested in it and it's fantastic, or you're not interested in it and it's like, well, there go all my tax dollars kind of a deal. It's like it's kind of weird. I think it's sick, but like a lot of like the general public notion of it is kind of mixed, I guess. If you could, I don't know if that really conveyed appropriately, but does that make kind of sense?
It does. And regarding your politician comment, I don't know if you know this fact, but Newt Gingrich, when he was Speaker of the House, actually sponsored a bill that said once I forget the number of people inhabited the moon, then we would essentially make the moon like the 51st state.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Okay, that's sick. But I was thinking about this like prior to, um, and hopefully you're okay with me asking questions as well.
please,
Um,
it's a dialogue.
Inherently, just because like presumably you know way more about this than I do, I would hope after this many interviews at least. Um, what would you say is like the sole focus of moon? What's a good word? Almost like moon domestication, if you could say that. Like we make it like a livable space and we make it like living capabilities. What would you say is like the main takeaway from that as a concept, and what advantages does that like convey for the general populace?
Yeah, I think you have to look at space exploration, especially like moon development, in a number of different dimensions. One is kind of like the reasons we say we're going.
Okay.
One is the first woman on the moon, kind of like gender equality type of thing.
Okay.
Uh, Two, since the last time we went to the moon, we discovered that there's actually water that's stored in ice in these permanently shadowed craters in the poles.
Yeah.
And we see that as a strategic resource. Transporting things to the moon, probably costs like something in the order of like tens of thousands of dollars per pound. And a gallon of water weighs 11 pounds. And you need a lot of water per day just to sustain yourself and then to grow your food. And also, water can be split apart into hydrogen and oxygen,
Yeah.
and create rocket fuel out of it. So,
Oh, very cool.
and
So
then
would you say in that vein, sorry, in that vein, are you saying like we're using the water as like a almost like as a substitute for like water on Earth, and we're just going to be doing like this kind of like marketplace like transition with like just harvesting water more or less, and then like rocketing it back, or is the water intended to self-sustain part of the part of the like space industry per se, because like the rocket abilities.
yeah, I mean the there's way more water on Earth, a lot easier to get. So the water on the moon is good because it's on the moon. It's like
Mm-hmm.
usable. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. The water on the moon's great if you believe we're going to be doing more space activities and it could be used for that. The water on the moon's pointless if you think space activities are pointless. Um,
No,
but
totally.
because the Chinese think that space activities have a point, that kind of pushes the
Okay.
equation a little bit different to say, well,
The
maybe we should hedge our bets a little and make sure
yeah,
we have a little presence there.
foreign competition is like the best domestic policy.
It can be. It all depends on how the competition's waged, though. Um, you know, the thing about beating the Chinese or beating the Russians doesn't necessarily you beat it on the terms that the contest is out, on the objective of making it to the moon. You could also beat them on sabotage, which would be counterproductive.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I always neglect the concept of what's a good word? Uh, interspatial warfare, if that's correct to say, of some sort. Like, is I always forget that there's actually like the that side of opportunity in space.
Yeah, and it's easier to sabotage on Earth than in space, for sure. Uh, rockets are difficult. So many things have to go right in order for them to work, and it'd probably be easier to mess something up than to build your own rocket, actually.
Fair. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of scary though because it seems so anti-futuristic. It's like the worst of humanity.
Kind of a little bit. Instead of like developing peace, we just develop different ways to not like to like skirt around the edge of like communal agreement.
It's like that concept of, you could leave a whole bunch of crabs in an uncovered bucket because whenever one tries to climb out, the others will pull them down. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
that's kind of one image of humanity that's a little sad. I mean, it'd be better. How do we as crabs kind of go and say, hey, you make it over and you can help us over, that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, develop like some sort of like non-destructive habit just for the sake of humanity.
Yeah,
Feels kind
we're
of tragic that that's out of the reach of what is mentally feasible for the planet sometimes.
I wonder why that is though. Why what are the issues? I mean, it seems like you kind of have probably touched on a lot of the history
Yeah.
of humanity and what have you. I mean, what keeps us from coming together and seeing, working on global solutions and dealing with humans across the world and expanding out into the solar system and that type of
It's
thing?
kind of I forgot the word specifically. There's like some super fancy word, but pretty much more or less it's like inadvertent isolationism. When tribes initially like this is like so far back. This is like full evolution and civilization development that we still exhibit today. When tribes come in contact with other tribes, we're talking like pre-Mesopotamia, like 40, let's say like generously like 45,000 BCE. Um, in order to establish your group as like a dominant, um, the only thing you could really do is like hate the alternative group, because the alternative group was essentially stealing from like your area. So then once religious development happened, as well as agricultural development, which that 1 and 1 equals 2 equals civilization, we initially established things like Mesopotamia, which obviously then eventually becomes destroyed by like super early Middle Eastern cultures like Sumeria into Babylonia and things like that. But while things started to self-identify, people would isolate themselves for the same purposes because of that tribal influence. And it's like, if my civilization is going to struggle, either yours needs to struggle more, or I'm just going to move there, right? And it's essentially, it's like the whole concept of like, this is like a weird transition thing, but like, if you can imagine like the Cold War as not only like the Cold War, but like human instinct, and it's like, oh, we don't like them, we need to beat them at like literally everything, or else like we're gonna feel bad ourselves. Like, we had Bobby Fischer doing like international tournaments to like beat USSR people in chess. Like national pride went all the way down from like all those tiers, and it was like, we need to be better at the Soviets at chess. And it's like every little thing matters, and that's how it's always been like throughout civilization. So then when you establish these senses of like self-identification, even if you despise your own local presentation and representation, you have to hate the alternative more. Otherwise, your government inherently isn't doing its appropriate job, and that's how they get people to retain like residency in their area and excel. So earliest examples would be like, this is like cliche, but like if you think of like the Achaean Greeks, who are like mainland Greece, versus the Trojans, who are like in like the Ionian like peninsula, like they hated each other even though they were from like the same region, strictly because of like where they lived, and they wanted to prove like we're the supreme Greeks. And that's just like human instinct, right? It's all about like competition and setting yourself as like the height. And astoundingly, despite like centuries and like millennia even, because this was like as early as 2850 BCE, like we can't just get over it and be like, hey, like, I understand like you're a communist nation, but you got some fat cash that you're clearly spending on space, want to work together. Like, it's just like inherent competition that won't go away, strictly because like at the end of the day, we're animals, I guess you could say. And social construct and social hierarchy is a human instituted like development, whereas the need to compete and prove like superiority is completely instinctual. Like, just it's just instinctual, so it just like runs deeper. And for some reason, unless you can like force people to alter their mindset almost in a sort of like conditioning sense, they don't naturally alter that. And then you wind up with a ton of individual nations that all hate each other, even though we're all trying to kind of do the same thing sometimes. You know, it's weird, it's intriguing, but like, I don't know. It's just so annoying sometimes that we just can't like just gentleman's agreement and then just work on the same project together.
Right? Or at least not sabotage each other's project. That would be even a
Yeah,
good
that's
step.
that's like the even stranger thing, is like, if we're not going to be able to do it, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure you can't do it. And it's almost as important that you fail rather than I succeed. It's very it's very like elementary mindset, but on like a global industry scale. It kind of feels like whenever I think about like foreign policy stuff like this, it's always like imagining each country playing Foursquare, and it's like one of them gets the other out, and he just has to walk back to the end of like into little square D, and then wait to become like better than everyone else. And like everyone just watches you fail, and it's like, oh, good, now I get to progress because you suck. And it's weird. It's fun. People are nuts.
Yeah, that's true. Um, but I keep thinking that like trying to set up an alternative on Earth is like very difficult in terms of society because you have kind of like this global culture which has like it's so rooted in everything that we do and it's constantly pressing in on us from all sides, through the media and through kind of norms that we daily live with. And I've done some interviews with people who've created like intentional communities, which has been kind of an interesting concept where people choose to live next to each other, not just to live next to each other, but actually to interact in some type of community thing. And you have like a whole wide range of intentional communities from people who really want to be self-sufficient or ecological friendly or around some religious or communal practices that they want to
Yeah.
have. And there's of course some of these have been notorious in a bad way, um, but I was thinking that kind of a moon colony or a Mars colony is so far removed from the rest of humanity, and you could really it's a really strong filter for who actually can be part of that colony. I mean, first of all, they have to be able to make it there, which
Yeah.
is that's like huge. And I'm just wondering if maybe off-world colonization, the biggest thing we might gain from that is sort of like an example of societies that could work different.
Yeah. I mean, definitely like obviously because they'd have to live different. Um, it's kind of like initial. Yeah, yeah. It's like when humanity does anything for the first time and everyone's like supporting it because it's like, oh wow, look at us go. Um, whether that's like we learn how to do stone construction for like ziggurats in like ancient Samaria or something like that, and it's like everyone promotes it. But this tragically, sometimes it comes across like when I think of like moon colonization or like Mars or whatever, or like extrinsic colonization. I think it's like it kind of feels initially like the most exclusive country club possible, but also it would kind of be it would just kind of be fascinating to watch an entire civilization go from ground zero to a point of self-sufficiency and see how like quickly it happens and see the adaptations that come strictly because out of like dependency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and of course, space colonization's really weird. I mean, it's different than like taking people, a group of like 50 or 100 people and putting them on an uninhabited island and saying go, uh, you know, versus
Yeah.
like the moon and Mars. Like you have to have such high tech just to be alive, but on an individual level, you're going to be so poor. So it's like high tech
Yeah.
poverty almost.
Especially since, yeah, like in every single way, like even initially, like if you do manage to get there, initially, like obviously societal responsibilities are implemented. And with a group that small, you almost run into like an initial caste system if they don't do it appropriately. And it's like astronaut colonizer numero uno is like the guy who takes care of all the crops and stuff, while that guy other goes out and like does this and this guy does this, and like you like hard institute responsibility, and it kind of does feel like very archaic almost, but it's so scientifically advanced that it's almost like it almost feels like in itself like nuanced and like paradoxical that it could like repeat itself in such a futuristic environment. It's kind of gnarly to think about for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the Egyptians and kind of like the building of the pyramids and what have you, on one level, high engineering, but then it was brought about by like a lot of manual labor and coercion and what have you. I mean, and they didn't even control the air supply of the people. So imagine what kind of control you could have when you're
Yeah.
like, we're going to reduce your oxygen ration by half. Let's see how that makes you feel.
Yeah, there's like I think it'd be phenomenal, just like super intriguing to like pull off. But like I always think of like this is probably just me being a pessimist. Like worst case scenario, how much like how quickly can you get to like assisting them in times of need, you know? And it's like I would hate for them to run into like some unforeseen menial error and have it cost like just like dozens of lives. And then you like go back to retry and it's just like astronauts everywhere and it's just like haunting. Like I like to think that we would be above it, but like in this specific category, I feel like nothing is out of the question for like possibilities and it's kind of intimidating sometimes for me. I don't know if that's just me, but
Yeah, it's like those New World colonies that failed, like Roanoke, I guess, without a trace. Um,
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
in
kind
some
of like that.
respects, not having a trace is more merciful than having a village full of corpses.
Yeah, like Roanoke versus like Florence, Italy, Black Plague life, right? Where like people are just piled on the street because they like are too scared to take him to a funeral home and stuff, like to a church because they have the plague. But like Roanoke's just theoretically, like proportionally, if you adjusted that, just as tragic. But it's just like we don't know where they went. Like they're just gone.
When you think about the future of humanity, like let's say 500 years, which is roughly about the time from Christopher Columbus discovers North America to now. If you look 500 years from now, um, do you see humanity still pretty much like it is on Earth, with like making these little short trips to places, or have we really fundamentally been able to branch out to the rest of the solar system?
That is very wow. That's like unintentionally philosophical. I think. I mean, fingers crossed. We get it together and we can like do cool stuff as a planet. Um, but this is pessimistic, but based on like my perception of like not only like humanity, but like each country's individual like foreign policy or like energy consumption or unintended caste system or like whatever. The only way we this is kind of going back to like my initial comment. The only way you convince nations that like this needs to be a top priority and start investing like GDP into like this as a concept because the ROI is just astounding because of what we can achieve outside of the planet. I don't think it draws enough serious discussion or serious influence really because everyone already that does space is kind of like working on a dime and until we're either forced to like find an alternative to like current planetary solutions, which we should be because we're kind of screwing it up, or like some sort of colonization on like a different planet has way more inherent value than like we can try to debate. I don't think initially it'll take off. That being said, just because of the rate of technology, I assume we'll at one point we'll definitely start getting like a lot of consistent trips in and out, just for presumably for like exploratory stuff, or we just get really, really, really good at like our satellites go farther or something. I don't know. That's hypothetical, obviously, but like the rate at which we can send things out to fix them increases, and then it's like, what if we just threw people on there? And I mean, I know we've already started sending a few years ago. NASA offered Spock, I don't even remember his name, the bald guy, if he wanted to go on vacation in space because he was like the general of Star Trek. And it's like, that's gnarly in itself. And to think that we're already to a point where like people can vacation out there, I assume we'll get good enough to make like some sort of consistent travel, especially within like a 500-year period. I would say even let alone like 125 years max, we'll definitely have like a big space presence. But
Yeah, I'm almost feeling like the 2020s are going to be to space exploration what the 1990s were to the internet. Now, if you look at 1990, very few people had computers in their home. Almost nobody was hooked up to the internet. You pretty much had to be a university or what have you. You probably find an easier time explaining to people what weightlessness was instead of what email and a website was. In fact, I'm not even sure there were websites in 1990 because Mozilla really didn't go. Um, Netscape didn't go IPO
yeah,
into '94. And then by 2000, pretty much everybody had a computer. Most people were on the internet. Almost everybody had email addresses. All major companies had a website site. You could actually order books online instead of going to the library. It's like a huge difference. And I almost think the 2020s are going to be that way. And in 2030, what we think is possible is completely different. And I think one of the drivers of this is development of the SpaceX Starship that's being developed in Boca Chica, Texas right now. I was wondering if you were
yeah.
familiar with this.
Very, very, very like surface level knowledge. Mostly I just know it's happening.
Yeah, and it's more than PowerPoints. Space companies have been really good with the artistry and the PowerPoints, but not so good of creating hardware that actually flies.
Yeah, and to your comparison of like the internet, I think it would be I think that would honestly be like one of the most human feats of history is if we could consistently find if we could work space travel the same in the same simplicity that we work like internet functioning. I think that'd be just like unparalleled in terms of like impressive accomplishments. That being said, if you push that comparison even further, like the internet excelled because it was like it didn't matter if you had the resources, you could like learn how to code, you could learn how to do whatever, and like almost like crowdsourcing development brought the cost of internet development way down, and then we found ourselves in like capitalistic environment of internet development, and now we are where we are, where it's like Google and Amazon and like these huge tech companies. If you could do that with space, I think it would be phenomenal. The only issue I would like feasibly like run into is I don't know how I would reduce the complexity of initial space entrance, if that makes sense, because like we still have issues. Like even last week, like we had that rocket that like the launch had to get canceled just because, and like they didn't even have, like I didn't hear like an immediate answer, but like if it were easier and we could find people to like simplify it and like lower the cost initially, it'd be great. But I don't conceive fully, this is probably because I'm ignorant, a world in which like the methods as well as initial costing get reduced so drastically that like very, very, very like ordinary individuals can participate, if that makes sense, like they did with the internet.
Yeah, um, yeah, it's hard to imagine right now, yeah, especially considering it costs so much to send stuff into space and it's so cost to develop stuff in the space, that can actually operate in space in a meaningful way. But, Elon is planning with this Starship that the same Starship would be able to launch like 100 people with each launch and would be able to launch 3 times per day. And they're working on a factory that can produce 2 of these per week. And whenever you think about that scale, there's going to be a whole bunch of capacity that just simply there won't be able to use up at the highest price, which would mean there'd be a whole bunch of cheap
Yeah.
capacity. It's like, a hotel, some of the rooms go for a high price, and then you still have these rooms available and you need to fill them up. Um, so I think that'll open up a lot of space. Um,
I guess that's way more akin to early actual like air travel, back when we could only have like airplanes that fit like 12 people on them, and it was super expensive to go to the next state. And now we obviously have like commercial airlines. I guess that's a good point.
well, and actually, there's a more practical, immediate thing. This video is going on a micro SD card that will be landing on the moon next year because one of the commercial lunar payload services companies, Astrobotic, is you know funding their trip by delivering scientific equipment for NASA, but they have spare capacity, which they then did a promotion of DHL to allow for people to send small things to the moon as part of that trip.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
sick. That's
So
very cool.
somebody, a dozen years from now or 100 years from now, find this video on a little micro SD card, and they're like, "Wow, this is what humanity was like before the second space age." Uh, what would you like to tell them?
I'm sorry for my apparent idiocy. Like that's all the knowledge I had at the time.
Uh,
um, I think I hope things have changed more or less. I hope like human social development has really like taken root, and instead of imploding in a self-destructive habit, we somehow find ways to make this second space age not only possible but like easily accomplished more or less, just through intrinsic motivation as a race. I think that'd be nice to be able to acknowledge that we've succeeded in not only like social agreement but social mutual benefits.
yeah, and I feel like the biggest thing that's holding us back is just believing it's possible. Um, I think once we get over that hump, then you'll see a lot of human energy directed towards making it happen.
I guess that's fair, because I mean, like, even what was it, 1963, when JFK started to get like federal governments and like smaller governments involved. I mean, it was 1959, but 63 he really got aggressive about it. And then yeah, but I think once you start instilling it as a possibility from like points of leadership positions, then the general populace, like, it's just like the flow of confidence. And then once you have everybody backing it, it's not only seen as possible, but it's almost seen as like expected. And we're gonna do whatever it takes to like make the expectation reality. In the same way that we did like Manifest Destiny, or we did like the Initial Revolution, or we did even like yeah, it's just like human nature where it's like, hey, we need to do this, and it's like, yeah, okay, okay, yeah, let's do it. So just like making sure like you can get the general population involved in in a weird way, like almost crowdsourcing your confidence and like consistent motivation. I think it pushes the entire industry forward naturally, and you find just like the success just follows automatically almost.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah, I totally agree with that.
I mean, and it operates on so many different levels. I mean, from like the individual that's trying to figure out their career options. Somebody that's really passionate about space might be discouraged by family, friends, and peers because of, you know, that's lunacy. Nobody does that, what have you. But once you have like the example of people actually doing it, then you're like, hey, I'm going to be like that guy, and they're like, oh, okay, I can understand that. You know, our in terms of investing, I like, hey, I'm thinking about investing in a space startup. Well, that's crazy,
Yeah,
and yeah.
I kind of hope it takes the weird. niche self-propelling tendency and like trend that like this is a bad example, but like how Bitcoin, everyone was all of a sudden like, oh my god, I gotta invest in this like right now. Like I kind of hope that kind of comes around with space because it's actually good, and so like we'll just start investing in it and we can like see benefits. Kind of like almost like right now with like Tesla, how it went from like $400 a stock and now it's like crested 2,000 just because everyone's like, let's buy it. Like if we can convince people to like invest in space, like I feel like the benefits there would be way more tangible and consistent.
But there's going to be a lot of losses. A lot of people are going to
Oh,
lose their
very.
shirts. So, um, did you know that Jeff Bezos also has a space company?
I did strictly through like passing information. Just because I was like curious about how many this sounds weird. I was curious about how many rich people were trying to send rockets into space. And so I just started kind of Googling like, does insert rich person have space company? And like Jeff Bezos does and stuff like that. Because like I was kind of curious because like specifically Warren Buffett has always been a huge investor in like transportation and stuff like that, specifically trains. And I was like, I wonder if he's like getting a foot in on space, and he's not. But Bezos and Musk and those guys certainly are.
Yeah, I think Warren Buffett would buy your potentially profitable uh, failing space venture for pennies on the
Yeah,
dollar.
just do his own capital, yeah, venture capitalism on your space company. That does sound more like him.
Yeah. In fact, he kind of talks about that, um, if you like, he uses an example of a cigarette. If you could pick up a whole bunch of buds for like nothing and put them together and make a cigarette, that's like, you know, more profitable than maybe some fancier businesses or something.
Fair. Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
but Jeff Bezos, he likes to point out that whenever he started Amazon, it would have been impossible if there wasn't like the like UPS and the internet and the credit card payment system. Like those provided like the foundations on which he was able to start Amazon. And he wants to provide sort of that foundation for entrepreneurs who want to do stuff in space. And that's kind of like how he talks about it. He's like, I'm just providing like the foundation, and it's really going to be up to like entrepreneurs to go and create businesses on top of that.
So, are you saying he's just like establishing a platform, and then it's just up to like private investors to almost like more or less like secure the rest of the funding for their projects?
Well, I think what
Like
he's
it is essentially like capital, and it's almost like it almost sounds like a Shark Tank for space.
yeah, I think more of he wants to be the UPS for space, and then other people will create the Amazons, the eBays, and the what have yous that will leverage
Okay.
that UPS, package delivery type thing.
Yeah, just build on what's before. Okay.
But what I think is going to be the big pivotal moment is when we could build things in space without ever sending any physical material. Um, I could see at some point in the future being able to take the material of the moon, refine it, and turn it into workable objects, all without any human labor, and even get to the point where you create other machines that do this. And then once you've done that, sending a probe to the moon, it's not a matter of manufacturing a probe on Earth, putting in a rocket, getting it to the moon. It's about sending the plans to this thing that actually builds it, and it just appears on the moon.
Almost. So, are you describing more of like a what's a good word? Like in a sense, like lunar 3D printing, or are you saying
It,
like we actually take the resources and like re like just use the resources almost?
no, exactly like lunar 3D printing. So you would have the ability to take the lunar regolith, refine it into aluminum and, carbon and whatever else you need, and then feed that into like a 3D printer type thing to produce stuff, and then that gets assembled into workable machines on the moon. And now at this point, the cost of sending something to the moon essentially becomes almost free because you just have to send your plans, schedule the time with the device to make it,
Yeah.
and it
So
appears.
then, like, what's your projected end goal with that? Is it just like lunar travel on a consistent, like, inexpensive basis, or is it like we're 3D printing stuff using moon resources and then we use those resources to benefit and improve, like, Earth living status of some sort, or like,
Well, it
are you
could
just
be.
wanting it to somehow become self-sufficient on, like, a fiscal platform?
Yeah. I mean, the foundational material, the foundational level allows for pretty much anybody to do anything. I mean, like lowers the cost so low that somebody with a good idea of, hey, if we could put this on the moon, then let's see if that works. They don't, they could just, essentially send the plans to the moon, wait for it to be built, and boom, it's there. But in terms of benefiting the Earth, I mean, there's some things that have been envisioned that could benefit the Earth. We're always in need of more power here on Earth, more energy, and only 1/700th billionth of the sun's energy actually falls on the Earth. Um, and so, if you could put some solar arrays like in orbit around the Earth in like some sun synchronous orbit, you could capture more of that energy, beam it down maybe in microwaves, and then
Okay, so is it more of like we're industrializing the moon as like a secondary production center almost,
yeah, I
as
mean,
well?
it could be, but you could think, about sending devices like this to pretty much every place in the solar system. And imagine there's like an asteroid that's on its way to impact the Earth and it's pretty huge. You want to go and destroy that asteroid or deflect that asteroid while it's far away from the Earth. That's when you have the most time.
Okay.
But sending a probe from the Earth to meet up with it, it's going to take too long. But potentially, maybe you could send something from a moon of Jupiter or the asteroid
Like
belt and what have you.
some sort of like, what's the word? Solar system defense garrison checkpoints, more or less.
Yeah, it could be. And then, as you get more and more advanced plans, you can send them to this device that's able to use the raw materials to make stuff.
Okay.
Um, so kind of, I mean, you can make
What
an
would
entire city and then it's all ready and then you send people once it's done.
do you think, obviously, like, sci-fi movies get some stuff right, but not all of it. In that vein of like, hey, let's send people to like colonize a pre-made city, like not even like just a pre-made city, but it's like structurally sound pre-made city, everything like that. Plus, they have their own supply source via this 3D printer industrialization. Plus, there's presumably like water source nearby. Like, everything is fine. How would you hypothetically resolve the issue of like just like oxygen as a resource? Because like obviously there's like weird sci-fi shows, like specifically I'm thinking like The Martian, where it's just like he has home base and he just goes back and then he can like go back and forth. But I feel like instituting oxygen as a resource would almost make it more competitive, for lack of a better term, than like how water was a resource for like early early agricultural, like the Paleolithic age, you know?
Yeah. No, it's a definitely a problem. I mean, I think one thing is once you figure out how to recycle like carbon dioxide and everything back into oxygen, um, you may not need that much net new oxygen. Um, you can react carbon dioxide with hydrogen and get oxygen, water, and methane, and um, you know,
Yeah.
kind of in a
Okay, yeah, it turns out I'm not great with chemicals, but when you say it like that, it makes sense.
well, I mean, it's just with inside of the Earth, we're constantly reusing everything. It's just the system's so big, we don't really see it all. Um,
Yeah, I'm like trying to like imagine a world where there's no like bubble dome over this implemented civilization on like some other planet. And if there is no bubble dome, in my head, every single person has to wear like some sort of space suit, and then there's like some sort of like refill or recharge station or whatever, kind of like the actual uh, ISS has like their own like oxygen provision surplus or whatever when astronauts go out. But like, yeah, like I think yeah, that's a good point. Like once you discover how to like self-sufficiently resupply necessary resources, there's no reason it shouldn't be feasible.
yeah, I'm even thinking that with inside our own houses, I mean, like your dishwasher, for example, it gets water from the public water supply, rinses the dishes, sends it out the refuge. But there's no reason why it couldn't have like a stock of water in your dishwasher that it used to clean your dishes, and then went through a process to get out all the dirt and other stuff and refine that water, and then basically reuse the same water. So you can almost have a dishwasher that was like it would have like a few gallons of water in it at the time that was manufactured and would never ever need additional water. You would just have
Weirdly enough, like this is super niche and definitely an unimportant comment. I used to work in appliances, and that's actually like a big thing they're starting to implement is like recycling its own water and then just like continuously using that because it like once it's like gone through the system, it like goes to a different site, gets like sifted out, gets boiled so it's back to clean, and then goes to like a stationary position so that it can get reused in the next cycle. So like what like I just think it's funny because like what you're describing is like a potential for something like that is already trying to be implemented, and now it seems like way more possible to me than it probably did before you brought up dishwashers because I'm weird.
but I mean like washing machines even, I mean, can you imagine being able to put a washing machine any place and not having to be able
That's a good point.
to get the water in and
Have
out,
to BYO water.
or even showers. There's no reason why the shower water couldn't be cleaned and reused, and
Fair.
kind of neat. So if it was safe and affordable, would you go into space?
Um, that's a good question. I think initially my impulsive answer is no. Just for the sake of uh like my interests and my personality and career path aren't like sustainable immediately in space. So the only reason I would ever go to space is like brief, like just sightseeing more or less. If it was affordable, I think that'd be sick, and I think that'd be like super cool as like an opportunity. But I think in like a long term projection of like, would you go and like stay there for a while? I would have to say no, just because like if the world is going to send anyone to space, I'm the last person on the list of like people we would benefit from, you know?
Well, have you heard of a a reality TV show that's in the work called Space Hero?
No.
So it's just in the works. So I think you'll probably see something in a year or so. But the idea is that it's a global contest to find an individual to send to the International Space Station for 10 days. And I'm kind of excited about it because, you talk to people about space and they're like, oh, what about poverty? What about this? What about that? But then you say, hey, how would you like to go to space? And they're like, yeah, sure, sign me up. It's like complete.
No, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, it's a. I just think the risk reward based almost solely on like my if you could like quantify my 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 portion of like providing anything like even remotely valuable. I'm not like the most valuable person to send to space, and like something like that, even specifically, if like in like some theoretical world where I was the one they sent to space for 10 days, it'd mostly just be like the astronaut explaining to me basic space concepts that would just be intriguing. Like I have no inherent value off of Earth, but I think as like a short term like entertainment thing, like if it became the equivalent of like me going to a national park kind of thing, like yeah, I'd give it a shot.
So, who do you think we would get the most value out of sending to space?
Well, I think inherently you would have to somebody who's like comprehensible in the region, right? Because I mean, like strictly off like legality issues and things like that, you can't send like some dude who just doesn't know anything about space. That's gonna cause potential problems to, in like the space station because he's just like he knows nothing. Um, so you'd have to send somebody with like basic common knowledge, and then you'd also have to send somebody who's like actually capable of like providing some sort of value in the environment. So I mean that alone I think restricts what I provide because like for example, this is a weird example. If the options were like me going to space or like send Bill Nye to space, obviously we're gonna get more value out of one of those options. Like just because of like who he is and like his initial baseline of like comprehension in like not only like science but like solar, even like the basics of solar stuff. Like he's obviously not an astronaut or like anything to do with space for the most part, but like he knows enough that he wouldn't screw things up.
Have you heard of the Dear Moon project?
That I have not.
Okay, so there's a Japanese billionaire who's paid Elon or SpaceX to send him and a group of artists around the moon in 2023.
That's kind of sick.
And so the idea being that they would be able to experience, well, I guess this view that you see here, from orbit. So they'd be around the moon and could kind of, I mean, the astronauts that we send people who are very stoic and very self-controlled. They're not known for being emotive, right? Or, having some type of emotional reaction or being able to convey like the emotion of the experience. And I think that the goal is, being able to send an artist to show this and to kind
Yeah.
of what does it feel like? I mean, it's always a big challenge. You go on a trip, you see a huge mountain, you take a picture of the huge mountain, you're like, wow, this is a huge mountain. And you show somebody the picture of the mountain and they're like, oh, whatever. you know, and like it doesn't come across. There's a difference between standing there in the valley looking up versus seeing a picture. And artists, I think, are sometimes able to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Yeah. When you said that, like I immediately thought like oh my god, like this is like 2023 beginning of like exploratory renaissance art, like almost. It's like if you can provide like an ethos argument to space exploration, like that in itself is like incredible.
I'm not familiar with ethos argument. Maybe you could define it for me.
Yeah, so like you have like your triangle of like argumentative purposes, and there's like ethos, pathos, logos, and it's like logic, credibility, and then like emotion. Uh, and if you can like fulfill all three of those, essentially like you're good at like persuasion. And right now, I would say like the only thing we really have on like a public domain, obviously, like a lot of this is like generalization, obviously, just because, but like it's hard to instill emotional drive for like the general population when the entirety of like the population only hears about like from like political press conferences where it's like it will cost x millions or maybe billions of dollars, and it's like it will do this and this, and they like list out their credibility, and they list like why they want to go, which is like fine, and they list why they can do it, which is like the logical, like the logos portion. But like the most important things in like all of history have been not only based in emotion, but like they've had emotion almost as like the driving force, right? I mean, even like ironically, like even looking at like the space race of like the 60s, like numerous like scientists and everything like that, like outside of the actual stuff, obviously. And a lot of like normal people were like, oh, we're never gonna do this, like, oh, it's not possible, whatever. But like since the general population was so like emotionally instilled in the possibility, like it became like self-sufficient, and we found the consistent drive to like make something into a reality. In the same sense that like if I told like that same thing, right? Like if I told the entire population, like, hey, look at like this beautiful artwork, look at like this poem that like this Japanese like artist wrote while in space, kind of thing, you can start to instill like an emotional longing for an opportunity, which inherently is much more what's the word? It spreads like a disease almost. Like emotion, like instilling will just like spread like wildfire, and then you'll find a ton more support. So I think despite potentially the dude's sole interest in just like going and seeing it for himself, the Japanese billionaire, it's gonna instill a lot of emotional desire and longing for personal experience in that same sense. In the same sense of like you said, like if I go to a national park, like Arches National Park or something, like take a picture, it's like, oh, look how cool this is. Some people are like, yeah, it's cool. But then like you get all the people who are just obsessed, and then they have to go see it for themselves, and inherently it drives like the entire industry. Like the entire industry of sightseeing and recreation is based off the ethos.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if that
exactly.
made sense. That was kind
No,
of a monologue.
no, it totally makes sense. If you create like the desire, then everything else follows. It's like, I don't know if you saw that,
Yeah.
probably in education, maybe you saw Stand and Deliver, the movie with,
Yeah.
so it's like the only thing you need is ganas, desire. So that's pretty much true with this
Yeah,
too.
totally.
Well, Reed, I really appreciate your
But yeah,
time.
I think it's totally feasible. Oh yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for letting me hop on. Sorry, I'm not like a professional. I
Uh,
super enjoyed it though.
my goal was to talk to non-professionals. So I wanted to
Well,
talk to
mission
non
accomplished, I guess.
I wanted to talk to non-space people. Look, have an outside-in perspective. So, so that's good.
Yeah.
Is there anything you
Well,
wanted to talk about?
thanks for letting me participate.
Oh, you bet. You bet. Well, uh,
Anything I want to talk about?
yeah, and that we didn't get to.
No, I think you answered most of my questions because most everything I had was just like uncertainty on like economic contribution, ROI, like rocket travel, like making a private sector for like space travel, like fully establishing it as like consistent and cost efficient and things like that. And like, I don't know. I think inherently by my consistency to not talk, you've answered the majority of everything I had to ask. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate your time. And next year, whenever the Astrobotic landers landing on the moon, I know you have a direct connection to that event. So
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
yeah. Well, you
Awesome.
have a
Thanks so much.
good rest of your day, and thank you.
Hey, you too. Have a good one.
Bye bye.